And hello again from Fox News in Washington. We begin with some breaking news. The top contenders for the Republican presidential nomination spoke to the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, this week. Afterwards, they held a straw poll, and here are the results. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul won for the third consecutive year with almost 26% of the vote. But the big story now is the straw poll's runner-up, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. In the key state of Iowa, he leads all potential candidates by double digits, and he's also moved into the lead in national polls. I went to CPAC Friday to talk with Walker about his rise, some controversies, and his record as governor. Governor Walker, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you.
You've shot to the top of the polls in Iowa. You're near the top nationally. How do you explain it?
Well, I think a lot of people admired what we did in Wisconsin, where we weren't just fighting for the taxpayers, we were winning for the taxpayers. I think after Iowa, people who maybe admired it but didn't know where we could run a campaign should we get in to win, said, hey, maybe this guy can win.
Your big appeal, and you could see it here at CPAC, is the fact that you took on and beat the public worker unions in Wisconsin. But this week you seem to compare that to taking on ISIS.
If I can take on 100,000 protesters, I can do the same across the world.
Governor, isn't there a big difference between protesters and terrorists?
There is, absolutely. And I made that clear, and I want to make it clear right now. I'm not comparing those two entities. What I meant was, it was about leadership. The leadership we provided under extremely difficult circumstances, arguably the most difficult of any governor in the country, and maybe in recent times. To me, I apply that to saying, if I were to run and if I were to win and be commander-in-chief, I believe that kind of leadership is what's necessary to take on radical Islamic terrorism.
All right. Let's talk about leadership. You're president of the United States right now. Would you commit U.S. ground forces to combat ISIS in any way, shape, or form?
I believe we should not take any option off the table. Now, I don't want to run in the war. I've got a bunch of bracelets on my wrist of Gold Star families, people who've given them to me at their funerals of their sons, and certainly I'm not eager to go do another one of those funerals in the future. But by the same token, I don't want any of these men or any other men and women like them to have died in vain. I think when we look at that and say there's radical Islamic terrorism, it's like a virus. We needed to be prepared to do what it takes to make sure it doesn't spread.
You say you wouldn't take anything off the table. That doesn't quite answer my question. Yeah. You're president today. You talk about leadership. Would you commit U.S. ground forces, whether it's a full-scale invasion, whether it's special forces, would you commit U.S. ground forces to a combat role?
For me to do something like that would require a number of things. Listening to the chain of command, particularly the Joint Chiefs, your National Security Advisor, and others, as to what's necessary, and listening to the people who are actually out in the field is the best way to do that. But then also bringing together a coalition, certainly reaffirming our major asset, our major ally in the region, that being Israel, but also our other allies around the world. It was just with David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, a few weeks ago. I think increasingly the Saudis and the Turks. There's a way we could put together a global coalition to take this on.
You have taken some heat recently, I don't have to tell you, for refusing to say whether or not President Obama loves this country and whether or not he's a Christian. And the conventional wisdom is either you're pandering to the Obama haters or you're not ready for prime time. Which is it?
The answer is neither. I'm not going to take the manufactured media crises and follow that path instead of going to the path that I think Americans want, which is leaders who will stand up and tell them where they stand on the issues that matter to them, that talk about how you're going to ensure that family that's been out of work for the last 6 months can find a way to be a part of this recovery, to talk about how we're going to take the power out of Washington and put it in the hands of the hardworking taxpayers. Those are the things people care about. And as after last week's visits to Wisconsin and to Michigan, when I heard from people talk about what happened in Washington, they said, you need to push back and say that's what the American people want to talk about, not this nonsense.
I agree with you. The question about whether or not Obama is a Christian was nonsense, was stupid. On the other hand, the question about whether or not he loves the country, Rudy Giuliani said that at a dinner for you. It seems to me it's fair game to say to you after the dinner, what do you think of it? Marco Rubio, one of your potential contenders, said, I don't think there's any doubt he loves the country. I just think his policies are wrong. Isn't that a better, smarter way to to handle that.
Yeah, but let's be clear on the point with the mayor. The mayor wasn't speaking on my behalf. He happened to show up halfway through an event that we had that night, and he can speak on his own. It's what I've said repeatedly since that time, as the president can. I don't question that. I think any person who's willing to put their name on the ballot has to have a love for their country and their state and their jurisdiction, no matter where they run. So I don't contest that against anyone who's running for office out there. My point wasn't to get in the middle of that, but rather to say, I want to lift the debate up to talk about issues that people really care about. I'm not going down that path. I'm not making those arguments. I'm going to talk about the things that matter to everyday Americans.
Just to be clear, because you seem to indicate it, you think the President Obama, loves this country.
I think, and again, he and anybody else who's willing to put their name on the ballot certainly has to have a love for country to do that.
You say that you're a fiscal conservative, but the latest projection, two-year out projection from the state of Wisconsin, is that you're going to face a $2 billion budget shortfall. That sure doesn't sound conservative.
Well, that's state budgeting in the sense that when the fall requests came in for every agency, including those I don't control, came out, that would be the total tally if I gave them everything. The budget I presented on February 3rd to the state legislature actually ends that 2-year period with a $123 million surplus, just like I finished each of the last 4 years.
But part of the way that you balance the budget, get rid of the $2 billion budget shortfall, is that you cut funding, state funding for the University of Wisconsin higher education system by 13%. You cut funding for the state park system by 28%. Governor, are those your priorities?
What I'm doing with the University of Wisconsin system, a system I care about because I've got a son who attends one of those campuses, is I'm giving the same sorts of tools I gave to public education 4 years ago. 4 years ago, the same critics said that was going to devastate public education. I took away seniority and tenure, and now we can hire and fire based on merit. We can pay based on performance. We can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms and for them to be there.
But the University of Wisconsin says they're going to have to raise tuitions on students.
But they're not. We have a 2-year tuition freeze.
I know, but they're saying after that.
Going forward, we have a cap on it tied to inflation. And so we will be much more affordable than just about any other campus in America. And the reason I point out the schools is they said that it was going to lead to doom and gloom. Our graduation rates are higher. Our third grade reading scores are up. Our ACT scores are second best in the country. We believe it's not about austerity. It's about reform. In Washington, they talk about cutting things. That's about austerity. What we've done in Wisconsin is push reforms. The reforms that worked before will work here.
While you rolled back collective bargaining rights for public worker unions during your re-election campaign, you said that a right-to-work law for private unions would be a distraction.
It would bring in another group of protesters in large volume to the Capitol, would distract from all the other things, tax reform, education reform, entitlement reform, UW reform, all the things we want to do going forward.
Now, the Republican legislature is fast-tracking right to work, and you say you're going to sign it. Why the flip?
Well, it's not a flip. I was a sponsor in the legislature, never said I'd veto it. I asked for them not to make it a distraction early on in the session. I presented my budget. I laid out my agenda. They're acting on that right now. Now's the perfect time. It's in the midst of the early things they brought up and the things that will come up
So
later.
Why was it a distraction during the election campaign, but it isn't now?
I laid out early on the things I wanted to do with education reform, tax reform, entitlement reforms. We've been able to lay out on the table. It is a perfect time now because the legislature is not acting on those things in the budget, and we'll have signed it by next week.
Your critics accuse you of another flip. They note the fact that during the re-election campaign, when you were running against a woman, you ran this ad.
There's no doubt in my mind the decision of whether or not to end a pregnancy is an agonizing one. That's why I support legislation to increase safety and to provide more information for a woman considering her options. The bill leaves the final decision to a woman and her doctor.
Do you believe that a woman has a right to end a pregnancy at any point during those 9 months?
Well, I think ultimately I'm pro-life because that's an unborn child. When I think of the ultrasound picture that Tonette, my wife, and I saw of our first son, who's now going to be 21 this June, it's indistinguishable not to recognize that that's a human life. That's why I'm pro-life. My point is we acted on the grounds that we have legally to be able to act under the Supreme Court's decision. We'll act that way at the federal level if we were in a position like that as well. But ultimately, it is a life.
But ultimately, it's her choice.
Well, legally, that's what it is under the guidelines that was provided from the Supreme Court.
And would you change that law?
Well, that's not a change you can make. The Supreme Court ultimately has made that. I believe in the right to life, and I believe that there are other things that can be done at both the state and the federal level.
Over the years, you have supported comprehensive immigration reform and a right to citizenship for people who pay penalties, this for the 11 million people who are in this country illegally. Here's what you said to a Wisconsin newspaper in 2013.
Can you envision a world where, with the right penalties and waiting periods and meet the requirements, where those people could get citizenship?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense.
Question, isn't that amnesty?
Well, I don't believe in amnesty, and part of the reason why I've made that a firm position is I look at the way that this president has mishandled that issue. I'm one of the governors that joined, I was one of the first governors that joined the lawsuit that has been successful, at least on this initial technicality, and I hope we prevail ultimately throughout the courts. And then going forward, I think the way you enforce it is not through amnesty. I think the better approach is to enforce the laws and to give employers, job creators, the tools like E-Verify and other things to make sure the law is being upheld going forward.
The question was, can you envision a world where if these people paid a penalty, that they would have a path to citizenship? And you said, sure, that makes sense.
I believe there's a way that you can do that. First and foremost, you've got to secure that border, or none of these plans make any sense.
But it's a little bit slippery here. Back when you were the Milwaukee County executive, you actually supported the Kennedy-McCain comprehensive immigration plan. Are you basically saying as part of a comprehensive plan, tough enforcement, E-Verify, the 11 million people already here, pay penalty, they get citizenship? No,
I'm not talking about amnesty in any means. And I said the reason for that is over time my view...
But you said you supported it.
And my view has changed. I'm flat out saying it. Candidates can say that. Sometimes they don't. I'm saying...
So you've changed from 2013?
Absolutely. I look at the problems we've experienced over the last few years. I've talked to governors on the border and others out there. I've talked to people all across America. And the concerns I have is that we need to secure the border. We ultimately need to put in place a system that works, a legal immigration system that works. And part of doing that is put the onus on employers, getting them E-Verify and tools to do that. But I don't think you do it through amnesty.
Are you surprised that you have come under so much fire so early? And in a sense, do you see it as a backhanded compliment that perhaps the other side, Democrats, liberals, are afraid of you?
Well, I think there's no doubt about it. I mean, if they look at Wisconsin, we didn't just win 3 times in 4 years. We won the highest percentage of any Republican governor in the country of Republican votes. But that's not enough to win in Wisconsin. I had to take almost a 12-point margin with independent voters in the state of Wisconsin, a state that hasn't gone Republican for president literally since 1984, not only when I was in high school, but when, as I joked yesterday, I had a full head of hair at that point. To me, I think voters recognize that people in the center want, in many ways, what many people in the base of the Republican Party want, and that's not a litany of issues. What they want is someone who is going to fight and win for them, someone who's going to tell them what they're going to do, and then ultimately go out and lead.
Finally, you are the son of a Baptist preacher, and you say that you and your wife are waiting for guidance from the Lord on whether or not to run. What is the role of faith in your private life and in your public life?
Yeah. Well, I laugh. Abraham Lincoln, I think, had it right. He said, God doesn't pick winners in politics. He just calls us to be on his side. And in this case, I think there are people of faith who can have a variety of political views out there. But for us personally, we make important decisions like we did years ago to run for governor. A lot of it was about Tonette and I and our sons praying about it and asking if it was God's will for us to run. When I got married, when we had children, we made other important decisions. The same thing would be true in making a decision here. We're trying to discern whether or not it's God's will for us to run, and then ultimately figure out the next step. And in terms of who's winning, it's going to be up to the voters.
Governor, thank you. Safe travels.
Thank you.